The second season of Young Justice came with a lot of changes and a lot of brand new faces due to the 5-year time skip. And as I've covered a decent amount of videos for the second season already, I've failed to mention or cover in depth a lot of these new additions to the team. Well, that stops today because I want to talk about Blue Beetle, the reason the second season is my favorite and one of my favorite interpretations of the character ever. I was first introduced to Blue Beetle with Batman the Brave and the Bold. If you know, you know, that version of Blue Beetle was pretty great, but Young Justice takes it up to a whole nother level. This version of Blue Beetle is by far, even including his DCEU movie, which I also thought was wonderful. And it really comes down to not only the characterization of the Scarab, the respect for the history of the previous other Blue Beetles, but also in tying in the Scarab's history and people with the character and with the entire season. Blue Beetle gets a lot of shine this season because he is heavily intertwined with the whole alien invasion, hence the tagline for the season. Blue himself is extremely new to the team. He's only been with them for give or take a month by the time that we get caught up to 2016 in the show's timeline after the 5-year time skip. And it's very clear that he's still struggling to deal with his new partner in the Scarab. And it's made very clear to us that he looks kind of weird when he's just talking to himself constantly. It's one of the details I loved a lot with Blue Beetle and his characterization is that we don't always hear the Scarab. So a lot of the times it is inferred as to what the Scarab is saying, and also it gives us a great perspective from his teammates' outlook when they're looking at him and being like, man, who are you even talking to?
Dude, I don't speak the... Wait, you can? What are you waiting for?
Blue's an odd little fish, isn't he?
Another great detail that I personally enjoyed about the Scarab is that it's also voiced by the same voice actor that does Jaime. It really leads credence to the idea of a symbiotic relationship and the idea that the Scarab is slowly taking on personality traits from its host. It's also well equipped to deal with alien invasions like the Krolataeans because it speaks just about every single language available to the Reach. Now, Jaime at this time does not know that the Reach exists, so I'm gonna keep them on the back burner, but we'll talk a lot more about them later when they start showing up. As for what Jaime and Tim Drake's version of Robin along with Lagoon Boy are doing here, they're assigned to Gamma Squad, basically the third set of the team, what some may consider the least important with the least dangerous jobs, or at least that's how Lagoon Boy was seeing it. And ultimately their goal was simply to investigate a Krolataean presence, and what they ended up uncovering was a ton of Zeta tubes, along with the Krolataeans trying to kidnap humans. And much like the original team, they end up failing their objective spectacularly because the Krolataeans are able to blow up their platform, but they also succeed in the idea that they saved all of the civilians and also have a Krolataean to purge for information. And they get a scene very, very reminiscent to the team during the first season, paying homage with the Justice League coming to help, along with the elder members of the team. And I had really thought this was going to be the setup for Lagoon Boy, Tim Drake's Robin, and Blue Beetle to all be the new centerpiece characters for this season, but ultimately it would really only be Blue who gets that rite of passage. And I'm pretty glad for it because they do him spectacularly. But aside from his big appearances in the first episode, he spends the second episode sidelined as that one's more focused on Connor and a whole different planet. And the third episode, he's pretty much relegated to being on Krolataean cleanup team. That's where he will spend a lot of his time during this show because he's a relatively new member to the team. He's not exactly considered to be used on some of the more big and important mission assignments usually reserved for the older team members and more experienced heroes. It would really be in episode 4 that Jaime starts to take his footing not only as a character, but also as one of the key contributors to the season as a whole. This episode revolves around him and Connor having to deal with stolen tech, dealing with the group called Intergang, who I mistakenly called Interpol in my last video, and you guys were quite quick to remind me that I got that wrong, so thank you. Either way, this is the first episode in which we see Blue Beetle actually interact with his Scarab and we hear the Scarab on the other end. And it's also the first episode in which he reveals that the Scarab is talking to him, something he's kept close to his chest and has helped him look like an idiot in front of all his friends.
Cannot scan contents. Not compatible.
Not compatible again? What does that even mean?
Blue, what do you mean?
It's also at this point that Blue Beetle reveals what he believes to be the origin of the Scarab, which is that Ted Kord, the second Blue Beetle, had created it as his magnum opus in new technology, and he was going to use it to help him fight crime before his untimely death in July of 2015, so about 6 months before Blue joined the team, and it was on that night that he found the Scarab. And with the death of one hero, we are born a new one in Blue Beetle, or at least that's how he believes the story goes. But then again, he's a pretty inexperienced rookie that doesn't know what he's doing, as evidenced by the fact that Connor, of all people, calls him out on not studying the league's playbook.
Full laxative before tonight.
You freshmen never do the homework. Haven't you read the case file on the league's first mission? Haven't you taken the guided tour of the hall?
Those are rhetorical questions, right?
And with all of that said and out of the way, that kind of ends Blue Beetle's relevance in this episode specifically, but it doesn't end our talking points for this episode, because there's one thing introduced here that is highly important not only to the rest of this season's plot, but to Blue Beetle as a character. And that would be the very first appearance of Black Beetle, who happens to be another beetle introduced to this show. I'll talk more about Black Beetle later when he makes his first real appearance against the team, and we actually get to see what he looks like. But this is the first time that he shows up, and it's worth mentioning because this is when the Reach start to really get involved with this season going forward from episode 4. This is shown heavily in episode 5, which has its entire B-plot being Jaime and searching for his friend Tai Longshadow, who has gone missing. The second season of Young Justice does this very interesting thing where instead of just following a central A plot like the first show did, because we have so many characters now, we're going to see more A and B plots. Tai ran away from home due to the classic trope of losing his father and his mother taking up a boyfriend that is unfortunately abusive. We see this quite clearly through how the mother acts and placates him and sort of maneuvers around the idea that he is abusive in any sense of the word. She's very clearly trauma bonded to this man, as I don't remember how long Tai's father has been gone, but judging by how long the new boyfriend's been in the picture, it's probably been a while. And despite his abusive nature, she doesn't want to leave or even upset him at all. We've shown this multiple times throughout the episode, and it's something that feels very real. Tai running away from this situation is also something that feels very real, and it's something that is happening all the time all over the country. So I think it was very brave of them to show this scenario, but I also find it very interesting that they treated this version of domestic abuse with such care and complexity, and then when it came to McGann and Connor, they fumbled the ball completely. Go watch my last Connor video if you want to hear what I feel about that. It's made very clear in this episode that Blue feels Tai is family and would do anything to get him back, even as the Scarab is constantly pestering him to stop looking, especially when they run into an elder of the Native American community, Howling Longshadow, who also does a lot of subtle foreshadowing for Jaime's character arc throughout the rest of this season.
Mine?
You search for answers, but the answers you seek will find you. Only then will you make peace with the one inside you.
This episode doesn't just serve to set up Jaime's character's future, but also sets up its present. We see throughout a majority of this episode, not only is he focused on family, on taking care of the ones that are closest to him and checking up on them, but he is also caring in the way that using his superpowers on somebody lesser, such as Maurice, isn't something that he's looking forward to. He does not care very much to use his powers to beat up on somebody he knows is weaker than him. He also just would know that doing something like that would not only expose his identity, but most likely make the situation for Tai worse, seeing as Tai's mom is probably not going to leave this man. And the big thing that Maurice was hiding, because he was the main suspect of making Tai go missing, was really just pirated movies and DVDs. And so while Jaime is going to report him for the cops for that, mainly as retribution for his abusive behavior, in choosing to do that, he was thinking smart and thinking ahead, getting rid of the problem while also not making it any worse for his friend. And at the end of the episode, it's revealed where Tai is anyways, and that just so happens to be in the Light's connection, and unfortunately, within Reach control. But we'll come back to the Reach and the abduction of the runaway kids later, because now it's time to deal with a crisis that Jaime has been going through throughout the majority of this season, and that's the idea that he lacks mentorship. You see, just about every single one of the characters in this show has a mentor. That was the main focus from season 1 and onward, was that these characters are trying to leave their mentor shadows and no longer be sidekicks. Instead, Jaime is left without one. Both of his Blue Beetle mentors are dead.
You've been in this era like, what, 5 minutes, and already you have 3 Flash mentors, one who feeds you junk food. But me, I never even got the chance to meet the guy who should have been my mentor.
And we also see that he's pretty cynical of the Justice League keeping these memorials to their heroes underground and hidden away from the public, and while the Justice League says that they are doing this in order to preserve the hero's memory, and because the Justice League doesn't believe in erecting monuments to themselves, whether alive or fallen, despite the big-ass statue of the founding members being in the Hall of Justice that we were shown in season 1. But I digress, that's the reason they're given. Jaime doesn't see it that way. Rather, he sees this as the Justice League's way of preserving the idea that they're immortal and that their heroes will not fail them and cannot fail them and die. It's actually a very good thought to have, and while I can see points from both sides, I understand why Jaime sees it this way. And it also doesn't help because the world doesn't even know about the sacrifice that Ted Kord made. Everybody that sees Jaime as Blue Beetle just believes it's Ted Kord. And so now he also feels as though he is living in the memory of the previous Blue Beetle, as though he has taken his place and has to live up to all the great things Ted Kord did in more ways than one, because the public believes he is Ted Kord. And with all of that mentioned, it's about time that we talk about Impulse, somebody who is going to be key to Blue Beetle throughout the rest of this season and is going to serve as his best friend, comic relief, but also his North Star, as we'll see later. I absolutely love Impulse and Blue Beetle, and I love listening to the Scarab talk about the two of them.
Impulse has created nothing, and its premise is faulty. Tactical destruction is more effective than creation.
Their relationship is really fun throughout the season, and I really do enjoy getting to see Jaime not be as serious and get to kind of chill with Impulse and have a friend to talk to outside of just the Scarab that doesn't simply think he's crazy. But of course, because we're getting to see them, plot stuff has to go on, and at this point that involves Jaime and Blue Beetle getting wrapped up in Nightwing's plot to help infiltrate the Light, and that means that they have to steal a communicator from Calder and basically take the blame for the reason why Calder and his group were able to come to the Watchtower, because they had to give the device to Nightwing so Nightwing could get the data in order to save all of his trapped team members like Lagoon Boy, and yeah, that's pretty much it. And unfortunately, during this entire process, Nightwing basically makes the blame look as though it's on those two, despite the fact that this is what he's planned all along, which I think is really messed up, especially for two brand new members to the team to kind of throw them under the bus like that. And as well, to make it all worse, they're going to ultimately get kidnapped. And it's during the point that the team is about to be kidnapped that we see Jaime and his ideological war with the Scarab. He doesn't want to engage in any sort of acts of violence while the other members of his team have been taken down and are threatened, whereas the Scarab wants to. And for the first time, we see the Scarab take full control of Jaime because of this.
Whenever he is, you leave me no choice. I am taking control.
What? No!
And this really launches into the idea of Jaime and the Scarab having a very symbiotic relationship. It honestly reminds me a lot of Venom and Eddie Brock sharing the symbiote, rather than Peter and the symbiote, simply because it really only talked to Eddie that we know of, or that we traditionally see in most comic book media. I think they have a symbiotic relationship that is well fleshed out and everything I want the symbiote to be and to be written as. As a matter of fact, this show even predates the idea of Null and his ability to control all of the symbiotes, and presents that as lore bits for Blue Beetle through the idea that the Reach are not only going to take control of the Scarab, but they use these Scarabs to treat as like miniature war soldiers to go onto a world, infiltrate it, and eventually take it over when the Reach deem it necessary to take control. And now, because I think it's worth mentioning, the Reach themselves have come to Earth in search of metahumans, specifically metahumans that they can then enslave and sell, but the show doesn't really say that outright because it's a kid's show, so they don't really make mention of that this season, but that's the idea for the Reach, to make the world compliant, to take the metahumans out of the world and control them, and ultimately to use humanity as one big bargaining chip on the global stage. And all of that while giving us one of the greatest and craziest enforcers in Black Beetle we've ever seen. That man has an A+ in aura farming. And on top of all of that, we find out that Blue Beetle goes crazy and is evil in the future, and that's why Impulse has come back from the future to stop Blue Beetle from becoming evil and taking over the world.
Somehow the Reach gets you on mode and Blue Beetle becomes the biggest, baddest big bad in history.
Don't make me tell you again.
Was that a lot of information to get at once? Yes, and that's exactly how the episode portrays it to us. This also takes a baseball bat to the theory that Blue Beetle had about the idea of where his powers came from and where the Scarab came from, now to only realize the very source of his power and the AI inside of his brain that he is supposed to trust to help him be a better hero is also at risk and at threat of taking him over and completely turning him evil, and that threat looms over him for the rest of the season, and it makes him a worse hero. And for the one time that he does actually care to trust the Scarab and give it full control, it works in his favor and he is able to absolutely dog walk Black Beetle. But it's something that Jaime is going to be hesitant to give going forward due to the fact that he is perpetually afraid of losing control and ultimately taking over the world. All of this while we learn that the Reach has a gigantic fleet underneath the Atlantic and are currently preparing to take over Earth, not just from a full frontal assault standpoint, but rather through the media in which we consume and through appearing as though they are good people looking to help Earth, to help them grow crops, to help them spread the ideology of positivity, and that the Reach can be a betterment for humanity. Doing so through not only their sleeper agents, but as well government politics. I mean, it's a fairly smart plan of attack. And with the Reach making friends with the Justice League, seeing as the Justice League had originally come from outer space and made multiple threats, the Reach now also look like the good guys on the intergalactic stage as well. And during all of this, we're slowly getting to see the characters having to go through therapy once again, because not only was Lagoon Boy, Blue Beetle, and Impulse kidnapped, but so were 4 new metahumans, being the Runaways. And unfortunately, this is going to cause a lot of trauma. So I think it's a wonderful idea to have these characters be taken out of combat and out of precautions for at least a little bit to check on them, make sure they're mentally right, make sure they're good, much like we saw in the first season. And while it wasn't the main plot of this episode, because we actually got an A, B, and C plot for this episode, I just thought it was a nice addition. But this episode is specifically relevant to Jaime because now he is having to make the decision between not telling the Justice League about what gets him on mode, as Impulse calls it, and turns him evil, or by telling them, and he is completely unsure of what action he takes will lead to what outcome. He's truly afraid of making the wrong decision and unfortunately getting himself hurt in the process and hurting others in the process as well. So now he has to figure out which lane to take. And while Impulse errs on the side of not telling because Impulse doesn't know everything about the future, ultimately Blue Beetle makes the decision to talk and to tell people because Blue is about trusting. Blue is about putting his faith in other people, especially those he sees as somewhat of family, like the team.
Impulse says that sometime in the future, I betray Earth and bring on a Reach apocalypse. That's not a future I can live with. So whatever it takes, get this Scarab off me.
And while Blue Beetle is facing turmoil and having to deal with all of these things, Unfortunately, the Reach are continuing to make themselves look amazing by helping out the team and what's left of the league while the rest of the league is trying to prove their innocence on Rimbor. So again, the Reach are just continuing to make themselves look amazing in the eyes of the public, even if the Justice League is skeptical. And speaking of being skeptical, I wasn't even gonna make this video yet because I promised that I would talk about the original members from season 1 and get through all of them before I tackled all of these new characters. But I swear, man, this episode and Blue Beetle was just speaking to me like, coward, you say you love Blue Beetle, that he's the reason you love the second season so much. Make the video.
Leave me alone, please.
You'll never be satisfied, not until it's done. Think of the views. Think of the money. Oh, you can't escape it. Do it. 2 Young Justice videos in 1 month. I'll do it. Okay, dramatic recreation over. Blue Beetle is currently trying to get the Scarab removed desperately, as he doesn't want to be the responsible for the death of Earth. But unfortunately, much like the symbiote, the Scarab is really hard to remove due to the fact that it is permanently bonded to him and has literal antibodies to keep itself in its host. Now, I had mentioned earlier about this being the way in which I always envisioned the symbiote acting, specifically with Eddie Brock, in the idea that it not only needs its host to live, but it isn't inherently evil. I have always hated stories that have made the symbiote out to be inherently evil, because I don't think that's really the nature of the symbiote itself, much like the Scarab. The Scarab is not inherently evil, but rather preoccupied with trying to ensure the safety of not only itself, but its host in a true symbiotic relationship, obviously providing the armor, the superpowers, and all of the cool gadgets for the host. But it's hard to see it that way when the Scarab's version of surviving is so far differing from the ideals that make Blue Beetle such a good hero, his values for family, for caring, and for going above and beyond for others relative to what the Scarab wants. But the idea that it is not inherently evil, but rather an entity outside of its control will come in and force it to be evil in a sort of slave and master subjugation, that makes for interesting and dynamic writing, and it's part of the reason I love the Scarab so much and love the push and pull between Blue Beetle throughout a lot of this second season. And as we've seen, the relationship between the two of them was never hostile, but it was always a little strained due to the Scarab always feeding him information that he either didn't understand and the Scarab didn't care to explain, or just information that Jaime didn't want. And now, ultimately, that leaves him in a position where the Scarab is now looming over him as something that's going to take control of him and to help destroy the world. So now Jaime wants to get rid of it as soon as possible, which ultimately and unfortunately leads to Jaime being a worse hero, as the Scarab and the user being in symbiosis is what helps to make the Scarab more powerful, even if being in control fully like the Scarab can be made him powerful before. It's only because they haven't reached a level of true symbiosis and are instead fighting for control.
Scarab was in control.
So give it control again.
Believe me, I'd like nothing better, but I can't risk that. Not with Impulse's prophecy hanging over my head.
But with all of this going on, there's thankfully one thing that's going to come to the rescue of not only the team in this episode to save them from Black Beetle, but also serving as a catch-all solution to all of the problems Blue Beetle has been facing. And that is another Scarab user who just so happens to show up at a very convenient time. That being Green Beetle, a Martian who also has a Scarab, which is in line with the idea that the Reach had sent out Scarabs to just about every inhabited planet to have sleeper agents to hopefully use one day for their own gain. Green Beetle not only helps the team survive Black Beetle and ultimately beat him, but also serves as a wealth of knowledge not only for the Reach, but a wealth of knowledge for Blue Beetle and potentially solving his Scarab problem. He basically goes to the team, provides his services, and offers to cure Blue Beetle of any sort of lingering Reach control that could ever potentially get into him. He says this because of his unique Martian physiology. He was able to go inside of the basically Scarab, and transform it into working for him and working with him in perfect symbiosis rather than working for the Reach. And on top of all of that, we also find out that the Light is working in conjunction with the Reach in order to help further the Reach's goals, when in reality they're trying to backstab the Reach, while the Reach is also trying to backstab the Light, and it's Inception meets Inception on Betrayal. Now, obviously, the team doesn't really buy what Green Beetle's selling, and they can't afford to be betrayed again based on the whole Calder situation, so they call in Miss Martian, the only person who's known to be one of the most powerful telepaths on the planet, potentially more powerful than your boy John Jones. So you kind of gotta use her. Unfortunately, McGann's at the point in her arc where she mind broke Calder, and really can't read people's minds the way she used to because she's afraid of abusing her powers. So ultimately, instead, what we get is Green Beetle guiding the conversation, giving more insight on the Reach, letting the team know what the Reach's actual plans are, which I explained like 10 minutes ago, I think. And finally, the team decides to accept and trust Green Beetle, and Blue Beetle ultimately puts his full trust in Green Beetle to save him from the Reach. All of this is a bid so that Blue cannot fall into the prophecy that he has been heard of. All of this time, Blue has become extremely vulnerable due to the idea of the prophecy hanging over his head, and that has left him open emotionally to manipulation and, unfortunately, betrayal, because Blue is very trusting and is so willing to try and do anything to be the hero that he knows he should be. He throws caution to the wind when it gives a minuscule chance for him to not end up with the future that Impulse sees.
I'm in control now, 100%. Don't you get it, Issy? The Reach can't touch me. I'm free, permanently free.
Now with the threat of the Reach in the rearview mirror for Jaime, we get to see him going back to trying to not only find Tai, but take care of him as he is escaped where the Justice League were keeping the metahuman kids to help train them to use their powers. So Jaime has to go find his friend, and now's the time where I really want to point out just how much the diversity of this show was fantastic to me as a kid. Getting to see people that looked like me and my group of friends, as I had a fairly diverse group growing up, was phenomenal for me to see on screen, especially to be presented in heroic roles, and I can only imagine that a lot of other kids my age felt that way. And for those of you that love to comment, I didn't need to see somebody that looked like me on screen. That's great for you, bro, and I'm glad that worked for you. But for me, this was a wonderful experience growing up, and something that I think Young Justice handles with a lot of care. But it's also in this episode that we start to see that Jaime isn't exactly acting all 100% himself. He reveals his identity to Tai. He ultimately decides to go after one of the big bads and leave his friend completely alone. And as well, he's just being more aggressive and weirder than usual. Now, you may remember this big bad from the time I talked about Red Tornado and his whole deal with his brothers and sisters. I firstly can't believe they actually returned this villain to the show. I completely forgot about this episode entirely, so that was cool to see another callback to a season 1 villain. But at the end of it, we not only see a really aggressive attacking move from Jaime, which isn't something that he usually does outside of Scarab control. He's far more of a defensive fighter than offensive fighter, despite all of the tools at his disposal. It's also shown in the attitude he has towards Tai, in an aggressive tone we've never heard from him before.
Jaime, I'm not sure.
Tai, this is not up for debate. We need to go now.
Excuse me?
It's also weird that he's insistent that he gets them to Green Beetle rather than getting them back to the League where he knows they'll be safe, especially with Green Beetle being a relatively new player. As well, he gets completely sucked into the media circle, into appearing in front of media and being good to them and having a conversation with them, presenting himself as a public hero, something he hadn't done before. And that's all because the Jaime we knew is no longer in control of his body, but rather is being controlled by the Reach. What Green Beetle did was not take Reach control from Jaime, but to institute it, leaving them completely vulnerable. And now that Jaime is under full Reach control and no longer in control of his body, he's doing exactly what the Reach want him to do, which is first things first, take control of Warworld, while also keeping intact his cover as being one of the members of the team. And so he does this as after the team beats Mongol on Warworld, he completely betrays them. This is also where Arsenal loses his shit and ultimately decides that it's going to be way better to leave my team to get captured and destroyed if it means I get away. Talked more about that in the Roy Harper video if you want to go see that. But ultimately, Blue not only betrays the team, but is now in control of the power source for Warworld. And if it wasn't for the fact that, unfortunately, the Justice League is smart and decided to protect the chamber in which the crystal is supposed to go into, the Reach would have gotten away with getting Warworld in their hands. It's also here that we get to see Reach is literally in direct control of him, using a voice box to talk through him, using surveillance at all times to see what he sees. It's real creepy shit if you ask me. And just to add salt in the wound and to kind of overplay their cards a little bit, the Reach decided to go public with Blue Beetle being a hero, and with the fact that Blue Beetle's Jaime Reyes, as well as the fact that Blue Beetle is working with the Reach and is one of their heroes, and to thank the Reach. This because a majority of the league is either wrapped up in bureaucratic bullshit, or, is a case of most of the team, is captured and incapacitated. So the leader of the Reach figured, hey, nobody's gonna be able to stop us, even if we do reveal on national television that Blue Beetle has betrayed his own team.
Thank you all, but it is I who should express gratitude to you, Ambassador, for giving a normal, average human being like me the power of the Reach. The power to save the world.
And while the Reach were actually running a very successful campaign of looking like the good aliens, and that they feared the Justice League's retaliation on them, and that's why they were so hesitant to come to Earth, ultimately that reputation would start to fall through due to the Light pre-planning to make it fall through. All thanks to one of the news anchors that works with the Light and has been making the Reach look good, deciding it was time to flip the script on them and start exposing their lies. Like, for example, the one ship in the sky that they keep constantly saying is the only ship in the area as being false due to the revelation of the hundreds of ships underneath the ocean. And to add just a little bit more salt to the wound, the rest of the team gets free, Mongol gets free, and he's absolutely running amok on his own ship until Black Beetle's able to put him down, which, for the record, Black Beetle being just as strong as Mongol is really scary because Mongol and Superman go toe-to-toe like every other Tuesday. Well, him and Green Beetle, that is. And with all of that fun stuff taking place, we're finally privy to how Jaime feels about being on the other side of the Scarab situation. Now it was once the Scarab riding backseat to Jaime, it's now Jaime riding backseat to a controlled Scarab.
That's not the way I talk! And stop waving! You look like the Queen of England. Great, now I'm Peter Pan.
But now with the team free, they're running an operation that they believe will fully cleanse Blue Beetle of any sort of Scarab and Reach control. I love that throughout this episode specifically, it's getting a lot of the inverse of the Blue Beetle Scarab relationship. Having to hear Jaime be the internal dialogue and to see the way he processes this episode is really hilarious. I had forgotten a lot about this episode in particular because I haven't really seen it in, gosh, probably since like 2016. Around the time I was like prepping to watch the 3rd season of Young Justice when I heard it got announced. So it's been a very long time, but it's really honestly great to see that it's held up just as well as I remember it being back when I was in middle school. That was almost 10 years ago. Wow, okay. Either way, it's really great to see the Reach try and, get through to the team and tell them, let me go. I'm not doing anything wrong. You'll all pay for this. And this is also a part in which the story finally reveals the truth behind the Scarab, not only to Blue Beetle, but to any viewers like me who knew nothing about Blue Beetle prior to seeing him in Batman the Brave and the Bold. And that show doesn't do a whole lot to expand upon the lore of Blue Beetle. At least in the one episode I had seen, it was prior to his second big appearance in the show. Either way, it goes on to explain that an ancient ruin helped cleanse the Blue Beetle, or the Scarab, sorry, artifact, and that's the reason it was never under Reach control. And so what the team is trying to do now is to re-incant the Scarab to free it from any sort of control of the Reach. It also gets explained to us that the Scarab was found by the original Blue Beetle and was worn by him as a piece of technology and as a tool to help him be a hero. And it wasn't until the second Blue Beetle, whom most people are familiar with in this day and age, that being Ted Kord, especially because him and Booster Gold are so great together. And basically between those two being who they are and Ted Kord being who he was, being a brilliant scientist, he decided to not use the Scarab but to study it instead. And so for Jaime to find out that that is the real reason why the Scarab is the way it is and how it's come to be for him, it's a big moment to like finally connect all of the dots for the character, as well for him to be free, for the idea of Impulse's weight hanging on top of him to be relieved. All of this generates a really good outlook for the future of Jaime as a character and for the future of symbiosis with his Scarab.
This mistrust is your only takeaway from our time together. You haven't learned a thing. This Scarab far prefers our partnership to being slaves of the Reach. You know?
And of course, obviously the reason they kept this hidden was so the Reach wouldn't know about it, so that the Reach wouldn't do anything to take away that monument in that place to cleanse the Scarab. It was honestly really smart, and one of the few times I agreed with them keeping a secret from their teammates because it felt truly logical. It's also revealed to us in this episode that Queen Bee basically let the kids go to the monument because it would help them in their fight against the Reach, and I thought that was a pretty cool note too. It's a way of like keeping the big bad guys powerful while also finding ways for our team to get wins over them. And this all leads to the summit in which the Reach and the Light basically get exposed for trying to play each other by Calder, who's been collecting this information all season stealthily, and we get a huge fight scene that incorporates each and every character. It's really cool, but as far as this episode goes, not much is really that important about this portion of it. Oh, other than that, Black Beetle decides that it's his turn to take control over the Reach and completely excommunicates his old boss in the funniest way possible. Oh, and in case you guys were wondering, this episode also ties up the loose end of Warworld as Mongol takes his shit back and flies off. That is pretty much all that's worth talking about for this episode. It's the next one that we really get the last big moment for Jaime in this season. It's really the first half of this episode that highlights the rivalry between Blue Beetle, Black Beetle, and Green Beetle, as well as giving us a very satisfying concluding fight between the three of them. I think Aqualad's inclusion is just really funny, but it doesn't really detract from the fight, as it's mostly a beetle on beetle brawl that ends in a very Avatar: The Last Airbender kind of way. The idea that Black Beetle is going to try and destroy Blue Beetle and by extension Green Beetle's Scarabs and leave them powerless and defenseless via a way of controlling the Scarab, sending their energy over to the Scarab and sending their energy back. Something I also forgot to mention was like Green Martians being the same sort of monstrous quote-unquote design as White Martians is really cool because it really just reinforces the skin color thing. Back on topic though, I really do love the conversation between Blue Beetle and Black Beetle during this.
Because I'm not alone in this battle, am I, Scarab? No, Jaime Reyes. Once we fought for control, but now we are united.
I mean, come on, it's almost like a one-to-one rip of Avatar: The Last Airbender's ending, but damn if it's not good. I absolutely loved this scene. I love the idea that the two have found a true partnership in one another, and that we are finally seeing the climax of these two characters melding together. This was an absolutely awesome place to leave Blue Beetle, and it was such a wonderful journey to watch him throughout this season. I mean, this show single-handedly sent me out wanting to buy New 52 comic books of Blue Beetle, and I was so excited for the character. And as for the ending of this show, Black Beetle being defeated had set in chain, basically his way of destroying the Earth, because if I can't have it, then no one can. And we get one of the saddest scenes in all of the show with Wally West's death, but it's also worth noting that the Scarab pointed out to Blue Beetle that this would happen. And I think that just makes it even more sad. I really hated this, guys. Despite the title of the Wally video, I hated this decision. But hey, that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. I know this video was, you know, a little extra long, but that's because I wanted to also cover all of the Reach stuff that was happening, as I figured it'd be thematic to cover the Reach stuff in Blue Beetle's video and all of the light side of things in Calder's video. Really enjoyed talking about Blue Beetle, loved him so much in the second season, and I'm so excited to see what they do with him in the third season.
Rather.
What the hell do you mean this is the last time that Blue Beetle's gonna be significant to any plot in Young Justice? They just set him up to take center stage and to do more with the character. You've gotta be Thank you all for taking the time to watch this video. I truly appreciate it. If you stayed to the end of the video, thank you all so much for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like, helps out the channel a lot. If you dislike the video, dislike it and leave some constructive criticism in the comments for me to help be a better content creator for each and every one of you. If you want to sub, it's free. You can always unsubscribe later and just helps me out as a content creator. As well, I do have a Patreon in which for $1 a month, you can see these videos early and unedited. As well, you can see my original vision for the video, like for example, that Green Goblin bit had a completely different audio attached to it that I can't post to YouTube, otherwise I don't get paid. And unfortunately, I'm in college, so I really need that money. Either way, thank you all so much for watching, and now it's time to shout out my $5 and above tiers on Patreon. So shout out John, shout out Demetrius Youngblood, shout out Metal Monk, shout out West Belladonna, shout out Oscar, shout out McGann, shout out eSibert13, shout out Gabriel LaFonte, Video Gamer 75, Golden Boy 420, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. You all are amazing. Hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day.